All right, we'll give everybody a few seconds to trickle in here, and then we can get underway. All right, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar brought to you by ICL Growing Solutions. My name is Quentin Moorhead. I'm the National Account Manager of Top Crop Manager in Potatoes in Canada. I'm joined today by ICL's lead agronomist in North America, Dr. Jason Hagley, and ICL Western North America agronomist, Christy Fallon. Today, during our session, Jason and Christy will explore new strategies for improving early season crop nutrition, seed potential, and season-long nutrient availability. Thanks to ICL for sponsoring our session today. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available to all attendees and registrants approximately 24 hours after our live broadcast. The session is scheduled to run for about 60 minutes. Jason and Christy will speak for 45 of those minutes, and following their presentation, we'll open the floor to questions. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please type them into the questions tab on your computer screen. This webinar has been approved for CCA credit in nutrient management. Further instruction for submission will follow the presentation. That's going to be it for me, so I'll let Jason and Christy take it away.
Okay, thank you, Quentin. It's great to be back with Top Crop Manager. We had the opportunity about a year ago to do a webinar, and in that session, we focused on polysulphate with the collaboration with Craig Davidson with the Taurus Group. And so we're going to continue that theme today and expand along the idea of making every seed count and optimizing crop nutrition for success. So as I think about the genetic potential of seed, it's very clear that there's a lot of potential, yield potential in every seed, regardless of the crop. If it's canola, peas, cereals, that potential is in the seed. But we also know that once we plant that seed, it's not always sufficient to get a high yield without some adequate crop management, particularly nutrition management, to make sure that every seed, every plant has what it needs to realize its full genetic potential. So I always like to start with this because I realize that ICL is still a largely unknown company for many in Canada and other parts of North America. But ICL is certainly not a new company. Globally, we're over 100 years old now, having focused in many different areas that use specialty minerals, whether that's food products, industrial products, or agricultural products. But specific to agricultural products, and especially fertilizers, ICL has been active in the North American market now for several years, positioning and representing products like water-soluble fertilizers, controlled-release fertilizers, and polysulphate, which we'll talk about in greater detail today or review, and then also talk about a new innovation for polysulphate called PKpluS. Okay. So let's lay out some challenges that we'll address during this webinar. So as we think about agriculture in Western Canada, we know that phosphorus is frequently a limiting factor due to low soil phosphorus levels. And we also know that sulfur deficiencies are increasing really all across North America, both Canada and the United States. And sulfur-containing fertilizers are increasingly important to realize the genetic potential of every seed. Also specific to Western Canada, seed-safe fertilizers, granular fertilizers, are especially important, due to the need to place these fertilizers directly with the seed at planting to supply essential nutrients like phosphorus and sulfur as well. And so thinking about solutions that ICL can provide and that we'll highlight in this presentation, polysulphate has been present. Polysulphate premium has been used in the Western Canadian market now for a couple of years as a seed-safe source of sulfur, but also potassium, calcium, and magnesium. We'll begin with a review of the science and the background on polysulphate and how it's used. And then also highlight other ways in which polysulphate can be used, specifically through a product called PKpluS that now incorporates polysulphate with those four nutrients, potassium, sulfur, calcium, and magnesium, but also including phosphorus as well to have a 5-in-1 nutrient granule. Moving down the list, Western Canada has a broad diversity of soil types that encompass many different soil pH levels, both neutral, slightly basic, but also acidic soils as well. We know that phosphorus availability to the crop is very much influenced by soil pH, and so we'll have a discussion about phosphorus use efficiency and how we can improve that with seed-safe early season liquid starters, specifically ICL's brand Agrolution pHLow, and then a biostimulant that we'll briefly touch on called BIOZ Diamond. And then finally, thinking about soybeans and then various pulse crops or legume crops, we know that nitrogen fixation is really critical for high yielding legumes. Nutrition to support nitrogen fixation can be applied on the seed at the time of planting, but can also be addressed through foliar applied foliar applications of micronutrients and trace elements to specifically support the nitrogen fixation process. And we'll talk about a Nova Pulse. So for some of these products like Agrolution, pHLow, BIOZ Diamond, and Nova Pulse, these aren't necessarily available in Canada for this season, but these are products that we will be bringing to the Canadian market, likely for 2025. And certainly, Polysulphate Premium and PKpluS are options and opportunities for the 2024 season. Okay. So with that, I'd like to invite my colleague, Christy, to talk more about polysulphate and how we can make every seed count with seed sources of secondary macronutrients like sulfur, but also consider ways to apply seed safe sources of phosphorus and the potassium that comes along with polysulphate.
Thanks, Jason. Okay, let's go to the next one. All right, and great. So if we start thinking about some of the sources that we've got out here, you see that polysulphate is there on the bottom where it has the sulfur, calcium, and magnesium. You compare it with a cross section of other fertilizers, and you can see that we have either one or two that are available, but none of them that have all three as far as those secondary macronutrients. So it definitely provides value from that standpoint on those critical nutrients that we know that we need. And, a big advantage of the polysulphate, which is actually a natural mineral called polyhalite, is you can see the chemical formula there. They are all in the sulfate form, so they are available for plant uptake. And it is mined deep underground, deep underneath the ocean, actually underneath the North Sea along the UK coast. So, they found the polyhalite that's there. The polyhalite is simply mined, and then they crush. And we have a granular form that comes out when they crush it. And then you have a standard that comes in that's the finer material. And then that is the portion that we make into the premium polysulphate into a prill or granule. And then that's also how we do the PKpluS, and it comes from that. Because it is a natural mineral, there is some trace minerals that are in it as well that are beneficial. So that's a good thing from that standpoint. If you're looking for a product that is both organic and conventional, this polysulphate fits that. It has a low carbon footprint, has less leaching potential. So we have environmental impacts that are positive, as well as yield and quality that we have seen, and nutrient use efficiency that we'll go into some more as well. Okay, so I kind of hit on a few of these, but you can see across the board. We'll start with, of course, it's organic certification, but we use it all the time in conventional production as well, because it's a very high quality product that is very sound agronomically with those 4 macronutrients or micronutrients that are in there. So when we have the calcium that comes, that's definitely the calcium and the potassium are big workhorses as far as helping us with that quality of whatever our crop is that we're coming off of. We already mentioned some of the environmental impacts. On the nutrient use efficiency side, we'll show you some of the results, but definitely seeing nitrogen and phosphorus as far as an increase in the crop uptake that comes when we apply the polysulphate. And then as that polysulphate is gradually released, it actually helps with taking it up into the plant quickly. And then we have less leaching losses of the sulfur. And then as we get the sulfur matched up with the nitrogen, and we get a good nitrogen to sulfur ratio, then we're actually increasing our nitrogen use efficiency from that standpoint. Okay, so here's a little bit of a picture. It shows you kind of what they're like. If you look on the left-hand side next to the granular, you can see it kind of looks like potassium chloride in a way. It's a little crystals, little pieces of the polyhalite mineral. And then you see the standard that's there in the middle on the left-hand side, the standard polysulfate. So you take that standard polysulfate and you see how it comes across, and then it's put into the polysulfate premium on the upper right, and then into the ICL PKpluS that's adding the phosphorus in. So if you think about the analysis of the nutrients that come, what is in the blue here is actually the granular polysulfate, and what's in red off to the side is the premium polysulfate that we've been utilizing up in Canada in the air seeder market. So you're looking at 18% sulfur, 13% K, and 3.3 mag, and then 11.6 on the calcium side. You know, as far as the seed safety, and like Jason said, making every seed count, we have a low chloride content of the granular polysulfate at 2.4. Our PKpluS is at about 3.6 on the chloride. And then we have a low salt index. So that's part of why it's so beneficial for us on making sure that we can get every seed that will count. Okay, so let's break this one apart and look at the picture on the left at first. And so then this is highlighting some of the nitrogen and phosphorus deficiency that comes into cereal crop. The control on the left, the polyhalite or polysulfate on the right. You can see that you have increased above ground or crop growth that's coming, good roots that are established there. And so you look at the figure that's on the right, the graph, there's actually 23 different points, and those are representative of 23 different sites where the polysulfate was compared against the control. And this one was in England from north to south. And across these 23 sites, they were actually able to get a 36% increase in the nitrogen use efficiency with the polysulfate compared to the control, even though we're not putting on any nitrogen from the polysulfate. So, you know, when we think about it, we've always known that we have to make sure that we have good balanced nutrition. This is very key for understanding balanced nutrition, understanding the need for the sulfur that's coming in here, for having a good nitrogen to sulfur ratio and increasing that efficiency from the nitrogen standpoint. The other aspect would be we have good root growth with the phosphorus. As we have that good root growth, then we're going to get more nutrient and water uptake. You can see on the bottom down there, the note, I didn't put a graph in here, but the note, as you look at that, when you look across the 2 years, the phosphate uptake in the plants, so the crop uptake was 34 to 41% increase when you look across the board. So we definitely saw some nitrogen use efficiency and some phosphorus use efficiency that came from the polyhalite or polysulfate. Okay, so this one is looking at the sulfur uptake. If you look on the figure that's on the right-hand side, on the x-axis is the days after planting, and on the y-axis is the sulfate uptake. And so then we start off with our number one line there. The number one line or curve is actually from ammonium sulfate or SOP. So you can see the release is fairly fast, but by the time that we get to 40 days, we've definitely leveled off and pretty much plateaued as far as the availability. We look at the number two line, or the yellow line, is actually the sulfate uptake of soybeans. And so when you look there, you think, okay, that's you know, delayed later as far as when it plateaus. It's at about 80 days. And then you look on that number four line that's on the bottom, that's actually from gypsum or calcium sulfate. So pretty slow as far as that goes in not meeting the nutrient demands of the crop at that time. So then you look at the polysulphate. So sorry, number 3, I got them backwards. Number 3 is actually the soybean uptake. Number 2 is polysulphate. So then you look at those two combined together, and you see that they're quite parallel to each other. Good matching of the polysulphate release in comparison to the crop demands as far as those go. And then if you do need to put on, a gypsum, the table at the bottom is looking at with 750 pounds of polysulphate compared to 2,000 pounds per acre of gypsum. In 40 days, we've got 58 pounds of calcium that's been released. And then if you look across on to 80 days, we have 88 pounds that's been released of the calcium compared to 77 with the gypsum. So, trying to make sure that we're looking at it from the standpoint of, yes, polysulphate is a natural mineral, but it does match the gradual or sustained release of it matches quite well with what the crop demands are. And then from a seed safety side, you see the salt index here on the bottom left, polysulphate at 32 compared to, your SOP at 42 or your MOP at 116. So obviously good seed safety, low chloride content with our polysulphate containing products. And this is actually credit to Mike Dolinsky with Taurus. He took this great picture and it shows the canola root tip and it growing right on the polysulphate granule. So obviously seed safety to the ultimate, I would say here, that you would get. So that was a great visualization of what the roots are doing. So thanks for that, Mike. So if we look at the seed safety side and making every seed count of what we're doing, we're after making sure that we're not losing a bunch because we have too much salt or negative effects from that standpoint. So you can see the x-axis across the bottom. You have a bunch of different rates, the control on the left, the AMS in the middle. The blue bars are where we have the polysulphate containing at 100 pounds per acre. You see that one on the left. That's where we were able to maximize our count, our stand count. And then if we look on the far right, when we put one time the polysulphate along with the KCl, then we did see some good benefits there too from a seed safety side. Obviously, as we increase a product like AMS or KCl, we're definitely decreasing the amount of potential that we have with those seeds and just losing them from a crop yield standpoint. And then, the first one was how many plants that we have, how many we saved. And then we look at it here from the standpoint of what the yield is in the bushels per acre. And so we were able to get with 100 pounds of polysulphate, 64 was a bushel acre. Our highest did come numerically with 300 pounds that we had of the polysulphate. And then if you were to combine on that far right side, the polysulphate along with the potassium chloride, then you got the 58. And so highlighting again, the seed safety is super important from a standpoint of not just the plants, but also the final yield. So polysulphate is a great option for that. Okay, so one of our new products that's going to be coming into Canada this year is the ICL PKpluS. The formulation that we are bringing in is actually 25% phosphorus, 8% K2O, 12.5 calcium 1.6 mag and 7.5 on the sulfur. So, you know, we have the convenience of 5 essential nutrients all in one application. We do have the sound agronomy that comes with it and the yield potential that we've seen, as well as the seed safety. And then we have that critical phosphorus that we need for the early season growth, that germination, getting the healthy roots up and going so that we can maximize all of our nutrient uptake, nutrient and water uptake, and then increase our yield potential. You can see here on the salt index, the PKpluS as far as the source is from single superphosphate and triple superphosphate. So the salt index is much lower than if you were doing MAP or DAP. The particle size that we have of it is a good distribution and sized where it will work really well with air seeders. The bulk density is about 75 pounds per cubic foot, and then the hardness is about 6.7 pounds. So it's definitely good as far as being able to have a good prill that will hold up from that standpoint, as far as everything that I've seen so far. So because it has the base of the polysulphate, then you're going to have that gradual release of nutrients, less leaching potential, more nutrient use efficiency, as we have talked earlier in the slide deck before. The other thing that is an advantage here is you have nitrogen flexibility, so you can choose your nitrogen source. You can put it on to where you're going to have less losses that are going to go different if you can find a cheaper source, ones that you want. So a lot of flexibility there. The other thing that it does have that is not in the guaranteed analysis, but it does have trace amounts of zinc, boron, and iron. We usually get around 240 parts per million of zinc and about 260 parts per million of boron and around 35 parts per million of iron. Some of the iron that we've seen when we've put it on some of our Oregon soils, we actually were able to pick up in a high pH soil. We were able to pick up a little bit in the tissue as well. So that was a good standpoint from that aspect. So overall, good for all soil types. So we can use it in all crops, all soil types. So definitely an advantage there. Okay, so if we think about how much phosphorus is supplied to some of the Canadian crops, the Western Canadian crops, you look at canola and the removal is here on the left-hand side as far as the pounds per acre. If you were doing a yield of 50 bushels per acre, you would need 39 P2O5, 19 K2O, and 11 on the sulfur. So if we were to apply 156 pounds per acre of the PKpluS, that would satisfy all of the P2O5. We'd have to supplement a little on the potassium, but it would supply all of the sulfur needs for the canola. We do the same thing for spring wheat with a 60 bushel yield as far as the estimate. And then we would need to put on 128 pounds per acre of the PKpluS to supply the P, and then add additional K, but all of the sulfur is going to be available from that PKpluS that the crop needs. And then field peas, 104 pounds per acre of PKpluS to meet a 50 bushel per acre P yield, provides all the P and all the sulfur. So for all three of them, the phosphorus and the sulfur is supplied by that PKpluS. And then after a couple here, you know, for the wheat and the peas, we need to add a little bit of the potassium. Okay, so, you know, if we kind of pull it together for some of the polysulphate and the PKpluS, you know, there's definitely yield potential, seed safety, nutrient use efficiency, all the environmental aspects that come with it, you know, balanced fertility, ease of application, because we can do it all in one. We can store it and blend it, and you also have conventional as well as organic, as far as you can utilize it across the board on all your crops. So great products to think about for balanced nutrition and maximizing every seed.
Okay. Thanks, Christy. Thanks for that review. Thanks for the introduction of PKpluS as well. So, you know, with these two products, Polysulphate Premium and PKpluS, we've got a couple of great options for managing secondary macronutrients, particularly sulfur, but also phosphorus now with PKpluS. So kind of continuing this idea of phosphorus management, I also want to talk a little bit about making every seed count with early season liquid starter fertilizers. And when I talk about liquid starter fertilizers, I'm going to put a little bit different spin on it, and start with the concept of water soluble fertilizers, because water soluble fertilizers like monopotassium phosphate, water soluble monoammonium phosphate, and other water soluble products have been very important to ICL, and ICL has been a leader in these products for many years globally. So when we think about starter fertilizers, I mean, this isn't a foreign concept to most, I'm guessing, but when we talk about starter fertilizers, particularly liquid starter fertilizers, we're really referring to this idea of managing the crop early in the season at planting to improve seedling emergence, early season vigor, and then you get that crop off to a great start by promoting both vegetative growth above ground as well as root growth below ground, to set the trajectory, set the yield potential for things to come later in the season. So really tying into this idea of making every seed count by getting every seed out of the ground as optimally as possible and getting it off to a great start. For different crops, different cropping systems, there's various placement methods that are used, including both true in-furrow systems, and putting that liquid starter fertilizer on the seed or in close contact with the seed, as well as different approaches to band it next to the row. And then when we think about liquid fertilizers, common examples include 1034-0, 918-9, etc. So some that are very readily available is commodity products like 1034-0, and then other products like 918-9 that are more of a specialty, but at the same time are available typically in large volumes from various manufacturers. Soil temperatures, cold soil temperatures, which are a factor to contend with in Canada, as well as the northern United States, has a big impact on emergence rate and how quickly that crop can get out of the ground and get off to a great start. And so this is an example from corn on the right side, where we have the average number of days to 50% emergence as a function of soil temperature. And what we see in this is that as soil temperatures drop, particularly below 55 degrees, 57 degrees Fahrenheit, the crop takes a much longer time to get out of the ground. And the more time it takes to get out of the ground, of course, there's more opportunities for seed pathogens, seedling pathogens to take hold and really compromise the stand of that crop. Starter fertilizers don't necessarily always improve the speed of emergence, but can improve the uniformity of the resulting stand by making sure that every plant has equal access to key critical nutrients like phosphorus early in the season. The lack of uniformity in emergence and plant development can reduce yield potential. And so in about a month or so on Twitter and social media, you'll start to see, particularly in the corn markets, where agronomists, CCAs will go out and start to put different colors of flags in the field to track emergence timing, the rate of emergence, and how that emergence time impacts the yield potential of each individual plant later in the season. But the example I'm showing here on the right side indicates that as we have a reduction or a delay in emergence timing, we have reduced yield potential. And then when we have a mixed stand of plants emerging at different times, that can also impact yield potential negatively as well. And so the idea behind starter fertilizers is to try to minimize this lack of uniformity and make the stand of plants, whether it's corn or any other crop, as uniform as possible to maximize that genetic yield potential. When we think about starter fertilizers, liquid starter fertilizers in particular, our minds often go to phosphorus, directly, along with other nutrients, like nitrogen, zinc, and in some cases potassium as well. But even though we supply this phosphorus in a starter fertilizer, we also know that in many cases, soil phosphorus may be adequate based on soil test values. But with that, we also know that early season deficiencies can occur based on the challenges that cold, early season conditions, whether it's in the soil or in the air, and the challenges that those pose to crop growth and phosphorus availability in the soil. And so, the idea behind this data in the table at the bottom is that with low root length density, or a reduced amount of rooting per volume of soil, there's simply less area of soil being explored for key early season nutrients like phosphorus. And when we can apply that phosphorus in a concentrated band on or near the seed, we overcome that early season temporary deficiency and help every plant get off to a great start and realize its genetic potential throughout the full season. Soil pH also has a big impact on phosphorus availability, and so we know that at high soil pHs, or high water pHs in an irrigated type situation, phosphorus can be fixed or made unavailable by calcium. As we reach more of a neutral or slightly acidic pH, we have optimal phosphorus availability, or the region of maximum phosphorus availability. And then as we drop into very acidic soils, the amount of phosphorus fixed or made unavailable by other elements like aluminum and iron becomes a much greater issue. And so as I think about Western Canada, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, soil types vary considerably, but soil pH also varies across this region of Canada. We have regions with very acidic soils, areas with more neutral pH values, or maybe slightly on the alkaline side, and pH can also range and vary within the same field or in a relatively short geographic distance. So in situations where pH may be neutral or slightly on the high side, one of the solutions that we've seen, or recommendations that we've seen, that helps to improve early season phosphorus use efficiency and yield response is through an ICL product called Agrolution pHLow 114511. One of the things that's different about this product, compared to liquids like 1034O that are very familiar to many, is that Agrolution pHLow 114511 is a dry water soluble fertilizer. So it comes in a bag. It's a dry product, but then is solubilized by putting it into water to make a very clean, high purity solution, orthophosphate based, low salt index, that can be placed directly in the furrow, close to the seed. This formulation also contains zinc, so it's a 2% zinc analysis as well, to meet some of that early season zinc requirement that we know is important, in combination with phosphorus to help promote good early season root growth. A couple of trials I wanted to highlight. These are both from Wisconsin, so outside of Canada, but northern environment in the United States with relatively cool spring conditions. We had the same treatments across both corn and soybean in furrow, so this would have been applied on the seed. We had a control treatment, so with no starter fertilizer. All of the other grower standard practices or inputs of nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium, and the broadcast program would have been the same across all of these treatments, including the control. We had 1034O, or also known as ammonium polyphosphate, applied at 3 gallons per acre. And so the thing I want to point out here is that this rate of 1034O applies close to 12 pounds of P2O5 per acre with those 3 gallons. And then if we look at treatments 4 and 6, we have this Agrolution pHLow product, either 6 or 12 pounds of dry product per acre. So we're taking the dry water soluble fertilizer, we're solubilizing it in approximately 3 gallons of water per acre to apply as a finished starter fertilizer solution. The other thing that I want to point out is that if you look at the phosphorus column, we have 2.7 pounds of P2O5 for the lower rate of this dry product versus 5.4 pounds of P2O5 for the higher rate of the product, contrasting to that nearly 12 pounds for the grower standard rate of 1034.0. And these were all on soils, same silty clay loam in Wisconsin. pH values, ranging depending on the field and the crop from 6.7 to 7.2, so right around neutral. Relatively high organic matter, high CEC, and then also relatively high phosphorus values as well. So going back to the idea that phosphorus can be adequate in the soil, but may not be adequate to meet those early season demands that we can then address with a starter fertilizer. So here's the corn data from across two years in Wisconsin. And the first thing I want to point out is the control, which is treatment 1, had a yield of about 223 bushels per acre. The grower standard rate of 1034.0 increased yield by about 4 bushels per acre, up to 227.4. And then as we look across the treatments 4 and 6, these are the 2 application rates of the Agrolution pHLow product at either 6 or 12 pounds of dry product per acre solubilized into water. And so as you compare treatments 2, 4, and 6, you'll notice that they all have relatively similar yields and all increased yield over the control. But what makes this notable is that, again, Agrolution pHLow at either 6 or 12 pounds of product per acre supplies a lot less phosphorus compared to the grower standard rate of 1034.0. And I would attribute a lot of that to the acidifying effect or the pH effect of Agrolution pHLow that helps to make phosphorus more available in soils like this that were right around neutral or slightly above neutral, and then also considering the effect of the water that's used to make a fertilizer solution like that for Agrolution pHLow, which may be higher in pH and also contain elements like calcium that can negatively impact phosphorus availability. The other thing that I want to point out here is the use of a biostimulant, BIOZ Diamond. And so this is a new product for ICL that contains fulvic acids and an yeast extract. So likely some amino acids with that as well. We won't spend a lot of time discussing this product, but as you look at treatments 3, 5, and 6, there was a significant increase in yield over the starter fertilizers alone by adding a biostimulant to the soil. And so this reinforces the idea, or brings up the idea that we can use biostimulants effectively, maybe not by themselves, but in combination with nutrient sources like starter fertilizers, to optimize yield potential for various crops like corn in this example. This is now on soybean, so similar, exact same treatments and a similar pattern of responses to what we saw in corn. If we look at treatments 2, 4, and 6, these are the various starter fertilizer by themselves treatments compared to treatment 1, which is the control. And in every case, we see an increase in yield for using a starter fertilizer in soybeans. But notably, we had a much larger response for the high rate of Agrolution pHLow compared to 1034.0, which was treatment 2, or the control treatment 1. And so this comes back to the idea of the importance of salt index. Agrolution pHLow is a low chloride or no chloride, low salt orthophosphate based starter, versus something like 1034.0 that has a much higher salt index and much more potential for having a negative effect on salt sensitive crops like soybeans. And this would extend to crops like pulses as well. So with the first 2 sections, we've talked about soil applied nutrition. We've talked about Polysulphate, PKpluS, and then Agrolution pHLow as a liquid starter fertilizer. And to wrap this up, we also want to talk about foliar nutrition as a way to make every seed count, specifically for legume crops like soybeans and pulse crops as well. And we will focus this around the idea of optimizing nitrogen fixation. So using soybeans as an example, we know that nodules are start to become established early in the season, but much of the nitrogen that's needed to be fixed from the atmosphere through biological nitrogen fixation occurs during the reproductive stages as the pod is filling out. Approximately 90% of the nitrogen is needed or fixed during these reproductive stages to meet the high protein requirement of a crop like soybeans. But one of the challenges that we see in soybeans is that as we get later in the season, when this nitrogen is needed, those nodules that you begin to form early in the season, you could be losing some physiological function. They could be dying off, and thereby compromising the yield potential of a crop like soybeans or any other grain legume crop. Nitrogen fixation in legumes, certainly a biological process with various species of rhizobial bacteria, but it also is influenced by nutrition. And so specifically, thinking about different essential plant nutrients that play a role in different aspects of biological nitrogen fixation, whether that's supplying energy, because nitrogen fixation is a very energy-intensive process, or potentially some of the micronutrients like cobalt, molybdenum, and nickel that are directly involved in enzymatic processes related to nitrogen metabolism, or ethylene production in the case of cobalt that's involved in the senescence or death of nodules over time. We have a new product, or will be a new product to Canada in 2025 called Nova Pulse. And so as you think about the name Pulse, this may be familiar in reference to crops, but might also be familiar to you in reference to a product previously in North America called Pro Aqua Pulse, which was marketed by Compass Minerals. About 2 years ago, ICL acquired Compass Minerals, or the South American business of Compass Minerals, which is manufacturing the Pulse formulation, and we've recently reintroduced this into the North American market under the Nova brand. So this product contains some macronutrients, specifically phosphorus, potassium, magnesium, and sulfur, but more importantly includes cobalt and molybdenum, which are very important for biological nitrogen fixation. It includes zinc, and although it's not included in the guaranteed analysis, it does also include some nickel in the formulation, which is another micronutrient or trace element, particularly important for nitrogen metabolism and nitrogen fixation. This is a foliar applied product, or product intended for foliar application. And what I'm showing here is an example of a soybean trial, again from Wisconsin. So in this trial, we had Nova Pulse at 6 ounces. This is a dry product, a water-soluble product, so these are dry ounces per acre, applied at 2 different times, at B4, B6. So this would be early in the season, as that crop is getting established and the first nodules are starting to form. And then we had a second application, or a second application timing, later in the season at R1, R2. So as those flowers are starting to form, on a soybean crop. In this particular trial, we saw that the application at the later timing, the R1, R2, had a larger yield response relative to control and relative to the earlier application of Nova Pulse. But we also saw that if we could apply 2 foliar applications of Nova Pulse, the first one at that earlier application timing of B4, B6, and then the second application R1, R2, we had the largest yield increase, 79.5 bushels per acre versus 72.4 bushels per acre, in the control. And so, based on this data, I would conclude that, we have the flexibility to apply a foliar product like Pulse at different times during the growing season. But if there's multiple trips being made across the field to apply other products, whether it's a fungicide, herbicide, insecticide, there could be value to applying a product like Nova Pulse or a foliar nutrition package multiple times. The other product that's mentioned here is Nova Finish. So this is a high potassium analysis product, along with some nitrogen, phosphorus, and micronutrients. And similarly, we see that the best performing treatment is a combination of the trace elements, the micronutrients contained within Nova Pulse, but also the macronutrients, and specifically the potassium that's contained within Nova Finish, which could be particularly important for soybean crops and legume crops in general that tend to remove a high amount of potassium and have a high potassium demand during the grain filling or the pod filling stages of those crops. Okay. So with that, Christy, what did we learn today?
Well, we definitely know that we have to make every seed count, right? And seed is expensive. And once that we get it in the ground, we definitely want to make sure that it's working for us and being able to maximize there. You know, you think about the graph that Jason showed and thinking about temperature and that even emergence. You know, I think that that's super important. Having that uniformity of the crop allows you to be able to manage it much better, and so it definitely does increase the potential there overall. So we have to make sure that we're supplying the right nutrients at the right time and they're seed safe. So that's why we would be looking at like a polysulphate premium or PKpluS, the gradual release or sustained release that comes with that to set the stage and that foundation. And then as we think about what all we can do after that, you know, if we can make sure that we look for synergies of supplying the nutrients that we know, like we know we have to have our phosphorus and our zinc early on to get them up and growing, but then we can add, you know, start thinking about adding a biostimulant, food for the microbes, amino acids to help boost the plant, then we can get some more yield potential that would come and set that trajectory for higher yield potential. And then foliars, you know, you look at what we could do there, you know, with pulse, we've seen it across the board on lots of different fruit crops as well, that I've seen benefits where I'm not just looking at the nodulization, but looking at the yield that's come from the pulse. And so being able to do foliar nutrition at the right time and get that balanced nutrition overall is really going to help us with maximizing and making every seed count.
Okay. Well, thank you. Appreciate your time today. If you have any thoughts or questions on the content we presented today, or potentially questions about the products we've discussed today, I would encourage you to reach out to either myself or Christy. Our emails are shown here on the screen, and also our ICLGrowingSolutions.us website, which has a lot of good trial data, product information, as well as articles and posts that we've you put there regarding different agronomic topics over the last year or two. We will have some time for questions if any questions have come in, and while we're discussing and addressing those questions, we also have the CCA credit QR code here, so please make sure to sign or scan that rather to get your CEU.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Kind of took the words out of my mouth there, so that's perfect. We can jump into a Q&A here now. Like you said, well, the QR code's up there. Feel free to take out your phone, click scan on the CCA app, and it should submit for you. If you have any trouble with that, you can also send me your name, first name, last name, CCA number to topcrop@annexbusinessmedia.com, and we'll submit that credit for you. Questions, we've got one right now, so if anybody else has anything else, feel free to send it into that Q&A tab. The first one is, do micronutrients of copper and boron have any impact on making every seed count?
Well, I'll start with it and then I'll let Jason follow up with it. So, we look at boron, and on cereal crops, I have myself put on a lot of different times of putting on boron and been able to definitely increase the yield potential that comes with the cereal crops for across the Pacific Northwest, because I'm based in Idaho. So boron definitely helps set the stage for that grain fill and being able to finish off it and have better yield potential that comes with it. Jason, I'll let you take.
Yeah, I think what I would add is going back to the concept of balanced nutrition that Christy highlighted with that one example of polysulphate impacting nitrogen and phosphorus efficiency, even though polysulphate doesn't contain nitrogen and phosphorus. Nutrients work together. They're required to supply what the crop needs. They're required to move in concert within the plant. And so specifically thinking about boron, we know that one of the relationships that it has is with calcium. And so with an inadequate amount of boron, we may not be maximizing the full potential of calcium nutrition. And if we can supply both in adequate amounts or an adequate balance, then in essence we help to maximize the potential of that crop and make every seed count. The other thing that Christy mentioned relative to boron that I would wholeheartedly agree with is the role that boron is often recognized to play in pollination and kernel set and seed set. And so with cereal crop or corn is a couple of examples. We can maximize that seed set and yield potential through adequate boron nutrition, and that's also true of legumes as well. You think about copper. Copper is in my opinion, an often unrecognized micronutrient for many crops and many cropping systems across North America. It's really one that we haven't paid a lot of close attention to over the last few decades. But over time, we may be removing considerable amount of copper, relatively speaking, in crops. Like soybeans is an example that actually remove quite a bit of copper relative to other micronutrients that the crop takes up. And so we need to think about ways in which we can resupply that copper and optimize copper nutrition for different crops, whether that's a soil application or maybe it's on the seed or potentially even as a foliar application. There's different ways to make sure that these nutrients are supplied at just the right amount and just the right time.
Awesome. I had another one come in here. Have you discovered any product synergies that improve foliar leaf uptake?
Synergies to improve foliar leaf uptake.
Any product synergies?
Yeah. I think that's an area where everybody's got their secret sauce, right? I mean, all of the foliar nutrition manufacturers have something built in the formulation, whether it's an amino acid, surfactant, or multiple components to really help improve the uptake and translocation of the foliar applied nutrients. I think one of the areas that Christy and I are both very excited about. It's not a new concept, but seems to be very effective is the use of amino acids, particularly in combination with micronutrients to help improve that uptake and translocation in the plant. You think about micronutrients like copper, zinc, calcium, or copper is an example. I mean, these are all positively charged nutrients. Amino acids are negatively balanced or negatively charged, so you've got that balance of positive and negative charges to help take up and move those nutrients throughout the plant.
Yeah, I guess when I've put on amino acids as a foliar application with like the Nova Pulse, and you apply that to corn even, and then you can increase the parts per million of the molybdenum by substantially by just adding the amino acids to it. And then from there, you think about, the molybdenum and nickel that are in pulse help with being able to have efficient nitrogen production that's going to come. So they work hand in hand. So amino acids are good options. We certainly are looking at additional biostimulants. The BIOZ Diamond that Jason mentioned is for really a fertigation or an application that's in furrow. But we are continuing to look at other options of which ones are going to be the most effective for doing as foliar applications and as a plant. And then, different adjuvants. Some people will use different adjuvants that they can put on to make sure that they can be able to get it to go into the plant to spread and absorb into the plant.
Okay, we got a bit of a technical one here. So the Agrolution pHLow product isn't made to replace a polysulphate 1034 or 1137 at high application rates, say at 30 to 40 gallons per acre.
Yep, that's a great question. So we've also looked at Agrolution pHLow as a starter fertilizer on potatoes, which often use that much higher rate of 1034.0. We started out our trial process, trying to match pound for pound, the amount of P2O5 in 1034.0 or by extension 1137.0 with Agrolution pHLow, and we saw that we get similar yield responses, identical yield responses in potatoes, but I mean that's not a very practical or cost efficient way to use a water soluble fertilizer. So this last year we dialed it back to 10 pounds of Agrolution pHLow, so 10 pounds of the dry product supplying 4.5 pounds of P2O5, and then we compared that to 10 gallons per acre of 1034.0 for potatoes, which isn't the highest rate used in potatoes, but in some areas like Michigan, as an example, Wisconsin, 10 gallons of 1034.0 as a starter on potatoes is a common or more common practice. In those trials, we had three trials on potatoes, different varieties, Wisconsin and Michigan. We saw that we got the same starter fertilizer response, or in some cases, a greater starter fertilizer response from Agrolution pHLow at 10 pounds per acre versus the 10 gallons per acre of 1034.0. So the same types of trends or responses that we're seeing in corn and soybean, just at a different different scale, indicating that we have more efficiency from Agrolution pHLow compared to 1034.0.
Gotcha. Well, it looks like you guys answered the rest of everybody's questions, so that's going to be our last one for today. Again, I guess if you want to flip back to your information, your contact information slide, we can leave that up for a second. Yeah, that's going to be our last question for today. So please reach out to Jason, Christy, or myself. You can reach out to me and I can forward on some questions. Everyone scan the QR code here. So all these instructions again will be found in the follow-up email, which will hold the recording of the webinar. Thanks for tuning in today, and don't forget to visit topcropmanager.com/webinars to view all of our previously recorded webinars. Christy, Jason, thanks again. That was a great presentation.
Thanks, Quentin. Appreciate the opportunity, and thanks to everyone for tuning in today and listening to us. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks. Bye.